go over on the All Aboard Florida project. I love speaking to a group of women because, and I know there's a couple of exceptions, but in the most part, we're strong women. And I know I have to share a story that happened early on when I started Florida Not All Aboard. I first heard about the trains last January, and it was an article in the paper that talked about train horns and quiet zones. And I thought, what is this about? So I researched the project and looked into it, and I became very alarmed. And I realized a couple of things. First of all, most of the people in the area were like myself, completely unaware of this project. The few that were aware of the project said, it's a done deal, there's nothing you can do about it. But I did not believe that because they applied for a government-backed loan that to this day has not still been given to this project. So we do have a fight, and that's one thing I hope everybody walks away with today is it is not a done deal. We have to unite and keep our voices heard and ask our legislators to keep being our voice to oppose this project. Early on, I knew that this was going to be a big story when I looked into what it was. This company is owned by Fortress Investment Group, a hedge fund in New York City. They applied for $1.5 billion taxpayer-backed loan. Not only that, it was an election year. I knew this was going to be a big story, and it affects every taxpayer, not just us here on the Treasure Coast, but every United States taxpayer. So I went to the Stewart News, and I was set up with a gentleman reporter. I won't share his name. And I told him about this story, and I said, this is going to be a really big story. He said, people are unaware of this project. We need to let the community know. Please help me share the story. You can be at the forefront of this. It's going to be a national story. It's an election year. It's going to be a big story, and you can be the point reporter on this. He guffawed and, that's a loan. They've already got it. It's a train company, and they're going to run passenger service. And that was it. He completely dismissed me, and I bet every woman in here has probably been dismissed once or twice in our life. So, what he didn't know is how determined I am. I went home, I regrouped, and I made 2 more phone calls in February. The first was to Eve Samples. 3 days later, you got it. 3 days later, she had an article about All Aboard Florida and the political connections and the money connections to our state government. She also mentioned, of course, Florida Not All Aboard, my petition, and that really started a zillion. We had 1,000 people like that on the petition. My second phone call was to Jana Eschbach, Channel 12 News. I'm sure many of you are familiar with her as well. I contacted her in the morning. She was in Stewart that afternoon. We did an interview, and I was on the 6 o'clock news that night talking about Florida Not All Aboard. So that was the startup, and from there, I'm sure many of you realize today we have hit over 53,000 people that have signed our petition against All Aboard Florida. We have resolutions up and down the coast from Miami-Dade all the way up to Brevard. You probably noticed me over here kind of looking at my lap. I had my iPad there, and I'm following the tweets out of the bond hearing that's going on in Tallahassee this morning. And All Aboard Florida, it appears, has really stacked that room in their favor. They have the Miami Heat, or the Orlando Magic, I'm sorry, has endorsed the train project. So, among others, of course. Exactly. So, but here, Florida, a sister organization hired a bus, and we have over 50 people up there that are speaking as well. So we have our voice of opposition up there. Representative Magar, Representative Mayfield, and Representative Harrell have all spoken against this bond hearing, being a conduit issuer for the private activity bonds. Representative Larry Lee was on his way. I actually got a text from him last night at 11:30, and he said, Casey, I'm on my way to the bond hearing, and my plane was delayed at the gate, and they can't take off until 9 o'clock this morning. So he intended to speak, and unfortunately was tied up in Atlanta of all places. So anyways, I just kind of wanted to share the background story, a little bit about women power. I started Florida Not All Aboard a year ago, February 2014. And I've got to make sure this is working. We are a grassroots group comprised of residents in the area and business owners. I started this group up to create awareness and also to change the course of All Aboard Florida. And I hope to do that by stopping any government funding. We've all heard about this environmental impact study. Folks, they would not have to do this study if this company had their own private funding. They had to do this environmental impact study because the Federal Railroad Administration, the administrator of that loan, required it because they're using taxpayer money. So I have to submit to all of you, why would anybody go through the headache of all this public outrage of an environmental impact statement if you could get private funding? They wouldn't, and they can't, and they've already admitted it, and I'll explain that a little bit in my presentation. Today, as I said, we have over 30 resolutions from Brevard up to Miami-Dade. The Treasure Coast is by far the strongest, of course. Communities, homeowners associations, our local governments, they're all on my website. And then, of course, I've already talked about the petition as well. It's all aboard Florida. They claim to be the first profitable passenger railroad system in almost a century. They are privately owned, ultimately, by Fortress Investment Group. This is an investment hedge fund manager in New York City. It's a hedge fund. They're there to purchase businesses, pump them up, and dump them at a profit. That's what they're supposed to do. So who is Fortress? They're the private equity hedge fund manager. What's interesting is back in 2007, they purchased Florida East Coast Railway. And they also purchased another company called Rail America. In 2012, Fortress did exactly what a hedge fund should do. They sold Rail America for over twice their initial investment. What they should do. But interestingly enough, that same year is when the All Aboard Florida plan was hatched. And I call it the All Aboard Florida Passenger Rail Scheme. And that is the same year that they decided to apply for the $1.5 million RIF loan. Another thing I want to point out about Fortress is everybody thinks it's a big strong company, they're going to use their own funds again.
No way.
They won't, you're absolutely right. There are no profitable passenger rail systems. They're not going to put their own money into this. Their stock has declined over 60% since its debut in 2007. Last year alone, it was down 16%. A month ago, I just posted an article on my website. Fortress lost 25% of its value last year total. All Aboard Florida plans to travel at speeds up to 110 miles per hour through our corridor. They travel from Miami to 79 Miami to West Palm Beach. They plan to go from Miami to Orlando, and they plan to double track or add a second track to that entire system, with one exception, our bridge right here in Stewart over the St. Lucie River.
Oh, that'll go on for about a week.
Exactly. Imagine they're going to have this huge choke point. They're going to have over 50 trains a day traveling north and south, and we have one single tracked bridge that's 90 years old.
Yeah.
So they'll be traveling early in the morning, late evening, right when everybody's out commuting, going to work, going to school, what have you. And of course, we've all heard, there are no stops planned. They have 4 depots planned, Miami, Orlando, and then 2 in the middle, West Palm Beach and Fort Lauderdale. And that's where the overwhelming support is coming from up at the bond hearing today. I like to show this photo because it was a train back in 2004 that derailed just north of the bridge here in Stewart. 30 cars, and some of you out here remember it, 30 cars derailed going 25 miles per hour.
Oh,
Now we've all heard it's a private company, we're privately funding, no taxpayer dollars at risk. Oh my gosh, that is one of the biggest falsehoods of All Aboard Florida. We have lease agreements our county has to pay. All the counties do. Ours, around $40,000 annually. We also have to pay rehabilitation costs on 2 to 4 of our intersections every year. We have, I think it's 27 intersections in the county in total. Our county has to maintain these intersections and rehabilitate 2 to 4 of them. The average right now is $60,000 to rehabilitate one of these intersections. Once they double track, that cost is expected to double. Who pays for that?
we do.
Taxpayers. That's exactly right. And what's more, All Aboard Florida, they just send us the bill. We don't get to have a choice or a say or can pick who the contractor is working on the train tracks. All Aboard Florida or Florida East Coast Railway and select those people. And again, just send us the bill. So we are on the hook just with that alone. And of course, I brought up in the beginning the RIF loan, Railroad Rehabilitation Infrastructure Financing Loan. This is a taxpayer-backed government loan. It is administered through the Federal Railroad Administration. They are the ones that will approve it. This is not appropriated through Congress. There is no vote for our legislators, and that's why I've said from the very start, we need our legislators to be our voice in Washington, D.C., and let them know we do not want our taxpayer funds to be risked on this extremely risky project. Why is it extremely risky? Again, there's no profitable passenger rail lines in the United States. Matter of fact, there's only 2 in the world. I like to call it a cylinder on rails, for those of you that remember the cylinder scandal. Also, a little closer to home, we have something similar called digital domain that I'm sure many of you are aware of, taxpayers will love from there. Can All Aboard Florida obtain private financing? I love to show this slide. This is from the executive summary that All Aboard Florida wrote in their RIF loan application to the Federal Railroad Administration. Due to the project's status as a new development and the required construction period and operational ramp-up, traditional debt financing in the capital markets is not feasible. Traditional debt financing in the capital markets is not feasible. All Aboard Florida themselves said that. That's why, again, we have to oppose our government being a conduit of funding, whether it's through the private activity bonds or a RIF loan. And it is a risky project. If this is a private company and this is such a great project, get private funding. Last year, you probably may have read in the summer, All Aboard Florida settled $405 million worth of debt for the railway for the southern portion. Which, by the way, they had an environmental assessment before the environmental impact statement that we all commented on this past fall. That environmental assessment was passed, okayed, stamped, approved in the fall of 2013. The residents in the southern portion, and that went from West Palm Beach to Miami, they didn't even know about this environmental assessment. I have spent a lot of time in the southern counties. I haven't met one person that said, yes, I remember that public comment period for that environmental assessment. I think there was about 12 public comments that was on record for that. So it just shows you the difference in how fast and quiet this project was moving until they hit the Treasure Coast. We're good. This junk bond that they sold at $405 million, what people don't realize, it is, I call it a junk bond because it's at 12 to 12.75% interest rate. I don't think too many of us are making that on our savings account. But not only is it 12 to 12.75%, they had to put a lien on the land, the rights to a passenger track, the ability to run the business if the project goes wrong, and offer to purchase it part the project is abandoned before opening deadline. They've attached collateral to these junk bonds just to get them sold. And now they want to use private activity bonds, which are tax-free exempt bonds, and that's why it does cost us taxpayers. Care Florida estimates that it's going to cost $30 to $60 million approximately per year in lost tax revenue for us. These are the purchasers of those junk bonds. We didn't spend a lot of time looking at it. We bought it because they saw it as an equity play, meaning they don't believe this project is going to be up and running and a successful project. They're going to get their money paid back that way. It's an equity play. They bought it for the collateral. Then, late July, Palm Beach Post has another article. All Aboard Florida wants to pay off these junk bonds with that federal taxpayer RIF loan. They want to use our money to pay off their junk bonds. Then this fall, we heard about that they're online once again for government aid. This was out of the Miami Today. And that is when they applied for the private activity bonds. You know, I find it really interesting with this project because everybody here has probably bought a house, may have started a business, what have you. You know, you look at your funding first and get your funding lined up, and then you see how much funding you have available to what you can build. This project has all along been telling us we're going to be starting up 2014, 2015, 2016, now I hear 2017, and they're still looking for funding. They applied for the private activity bonds in the fall of last year. So all along they were counting on that RIF loan, but because of our voices and because our legislators were being our voice, they absolutely are desperately looking for another source of funding. That's why we have about 50 Treasure Coast residents, and we have some of our legislators at that bond hearing today speaking to be our voice and saying this is an extremely risky project. Keep the government hands on funding these guys. So we did hear that the U.S. Department of Transportation did approve the $1.75 billion in private activity bonds. About a month ago, I traveled to Washington, D.C., and I delivered over 51,000 signed petitions to Congressman Patrick Murphy's office. He was one of the first legislators that I spoke to, and he spoke out against this project. It was a really a big deal because it helped shine the light on this project. He set up a meeting in front of the acting director of the Federal Railroad Administration, and I was able to present those petitions, and we talked a little bit about these private activity bonds. Normally, the private activity bonds are attached to a way to fund them at the end when they come due. So they're normally attached to a RIF loan or something called a TIFIA loan, another government program. In this case, it's not. They said this is a very unique bond allocation because they do not have an end game and end payout for these bonds. And that is why that they attach the environmental impact statement to these bonds. They cannot spend one
penny on these bonds until that environmental impact statement is approved and another 45 days has been passed. So right now, they also said, and thank you all, anybody who made comments on the environmental impact statement, record amount. They said it was unheard of to have that many comments on an environmental impact statement. So they have 12,000 comments that they're going through. Not sure when we're going to see a final environmental impact statement come out yet, but should All Aboard Florida be able to issue private activity bonds, it is tied to the environmental impact statement. The RIF loan, it is still on the table, folks. It was kind of reported they took it off the table. Truth is, I guess they're calling it repurposing the RIF loan. And we're not exactly sure what that means, but we found that out in the meeting as well. So, you know, again, this company is desperate for government funding. The RIF loan's on the table. These bonds are something that they're hoping to be able to issue. One thing I question with these private activity bonds, I brought the other junk bonds up for a reason. Collateral was attached to sell them, and they were still at 12 and 12.75%. And that was only $400 million. We're talking $1.75 billion worth of bonds. What interest rate are they going to have to be at, and who's going to purchase them? You know, a lot of people say mom and pops. 1.75 billion is a lot of mom and pops, and I don't believe it for a second. So even if they somehow get the approval through our state of Florida to sell these bonds, they still have to find buyers, and they need to issue them before July 1st.
This year?
This year. Wow. So the longer we're tying up the federal and the Florida Department of Finance Corporation, the FDFC, you know, time is ticking. July 1st is coming right up. All right, I covered this a little bit with you already. And of course, the Florida Economic Development Council on the bottom is the folks having the public hearing this morning on these bonds. A little disappointing with the FDFC. The board members did not attend the meeting. So they, yeah. I mean, they call a hearing in Tallahassee, which is not anywhere near the project, and then public actually attends, and they're not showing up. It's very disappointing, and obviously people are infuriated that ultimately they work for the people. They ultimately are paid by our tax dollars, and they didn't listen to the residents that showed up. Again, the one thing please take away today, it is not a done deal, no matter what you hear. All Aboard Florida, one thing they do have is an excellent PR machine that tries to make people believe it's a done deal. It looks like they're building already the depots on like West Palm Beach. I've been down there, yes, they've closed down the streets, they have done demolition, but there is no building. I've tried to find building permits, I cannot. So it's very interesting. But they have beautiful pictures in the paper, they have beautiful renderings. One of the buildings in Miami that they wanted to build, it was so tall that the air traffic controller said, you can't build that here, it's way too tall. So they make it sound like it's a done deal, but they've got a long way to go. We call it corporate welfare on these private activity bonds, again, because they're tax exempt. Taxes will not be paid on any earned income on these bonds. You know what? Sell private bonds. We need to keep our government from being a conduit of funding in any way, shape, or form. We have to ask, is All Aboard, are they competing to see who can lose the most taxpayer money? You know, Amtrak already goes from Miami to Orlando, and it lost over $46 million in 2013. Tri-Rail operates in the same market, South Florida, lost $87 million. So these two companies that operate in the same area lost over $100 million in 2013. And now All Aboard Florida wants us to believe they somehow have found the magic formula to create the first profitable passenger rail system, not only in the United States, but right here in South Florida. Frankly, I would hope they took Tri-Rail and Amtrak first, right? Tell them how to be profitable and get enough taxpayers' money. There's also another form of competition, and it's called Megabus. You may have seen it traveling up the highway. It goes from South Florida up to Orlando as well. Fees start at $1, but they maximize out about $17 a passenger. Care Florida commissioned a study, and they're finding out that the tickets for All Aboard Florida are going to be around $200 a passenger. What family can afford this? So, you know, we already have Megabus, and they have Wi-Fi as well. So, yeah. Again, use your own money if you want to use this project. What's All Aboard Florida trying to keep secret? Last year, they actually sued to block the release of their ridership info, probably because of the what the Care Florida study pointed out of how expensive this is truly going to be. We're also concerned locally. You don't need to live near the tracks, and you do not need to be a boater to be affected by All Aboard Florida. And the reason is the declining real estate values. This is going to affect our tax base in the community, and our elected officials are going to have to figure out how they're going to make up for that lost income. You know, as well as I do, you either cut services or you raise taxes. It's going to impact everybody. Martin County, Laurel Kelly is doing a study right now with Florida Atlantic University, and they hope to have the results in the summer. We had always talked about a 20% decline in real estate values with properties that are within 1,000 feet or less of the tracks. She actually feels it could be more here in Martin County because of all the waterfront properties that are located west of the bridge. It's like $1 billion worth of properties. And so we're going to be very anxious to find out what the commission or what the study finds out, because it could be a lot more than the 20%. I listed here just some of the properties that are within 1,000 feet of the track. In Martin County, we have 1,400 properties. Palm Beach, over 170,000 properties. It's incredible, absolutely incredible. I also like to talk about public safety. There's so many issues with this project, so many issues. All Aboard Florida has 95% grade crossings, meaning the ones that go right over the roads. You know, they like to bring up Europe has train systems and they're wonderful. Well, guess what? In Europe they have tunnels and they have bridges. They're not impacting communities like us. They're not retrofitting train tracks. That's true. It's unconscionable what they're trying to do. These tracks are over 100 years old and they're trying to retrofit them into a high-speed rail system, which is, it's not even going to truly be high-speed rail because the tracks are so old.
That's pretty obvious.
Acela in the northeast, very few accidents on there. That's because 98% of their crossings are bridged or tunneled. I have a video here. It's going to be a little outdated because I released it on Halloween night. I called it our Fright Night video, but I'd like to share it with you and talk a little bit more about safety.
So they want to bring speed trains to the Treasure Coast. Notice anything about high-speed trains? None of them cross roads at street level, or it's called at grade. They bridge over or tunnel under streets in heavily populated areas. Most have fences and other barriers along their tracks. This is typical of high-speed rail worldwide.
All Aboard Florida will cross more than 340 streets at grade level from Miami to Orlando, reaching speeds up to 110 miles per hour. Ripping through our towns on the Treasure and Space coasts, they will increase the chance of accidents and deaths by 300%.
Amtrak's express train, Acela, crosses only 11 streets at grade on its entire route from Boston to New York to Washington, D.C. Even with safety features at grade crossings, accidents happen.
A 2005 New York Times article reports that a car rolled under the crossing gate at a low speed and was struck by the Amtrak Acela train. The driver, a 62-year-old grandmother, and 2 young children were killed. The gates were later inspected and declared to have been functioning properly at the time of the accident.
Since the 60s, Florida East Coast Rail, parent company of All Aboard, has only run freight trains along the Miami to Jacksonville route. Despite slower speed, their accident rates are alarming. 211 accidents with 46 deaths in just the last 10 years.
Of even greater concern are the numbers of pedestrian and trespasser deaths along the tracks. Fencing and barriers only at intersections will not stop people and animals from trying to cross the tracks.
At a press conference, another major safety hazard was discussed by John Corris. He is CEO of the Jupiter Medical Center. Sometimes 8, 15, 30 seconds, he said, are all we have to save a life in the ER. I'm very concerned about the trains keeping ambulances from getting to us in time.
We at Florida Not All Aboard believe that it is unconscionable for anyone, private company, or public enterprise.
How you can help us stop our communities from being destroyed. Our lives depend on it.
We've had over 4,000 hits on that video since we released it last October, and you can find that on our website, on our YouTube channel. And please share it. You can get online and share it with other folks. It really illustrates the safety dangers that go along with this train. This Tuesday, I'm going to have Mr. Mark Robitaille on my radio show. As Noreen was kind enough to point out, it's 5:30 to 6 on Tuesday evenings, and he'll be talking about the emergency response impacts for the hospital here in the area. And also Commissioner Haddix is up at the bond hearing today, and he's going to pop in or call in and let us know his thoughts of sitting there at the bond hearing and what he found out. So it'll be an interesting show. If you happen to miss it, I archive all the shows on my website, CaseyIngramShow.com, so you can click on it anytime. So, have any of you heard of the Fun Train? Well, it's a very, very interesting train. Back in '98, a private company, on their own time, decided to run this fun train from South Florida up to Orlando. 50s style dinner theme bar, they had a tiki bar, they had video games for the kids, just a really fun train. Problem is, and they were also, by the way, going to capitalize on all these vacationers in South Florida that want to go between Miami and Orlando. But the problem is, in 11 months, it went belly up. Why? They didn't get the ridership. So again, it's interesting. Fortress Investment Group, Florida East Coast, wants to use our taxpayer money to front this risky project for themselves. I can't blame them with statistics like this, and I like to quote Albert Einstein about insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Here we are just a few years later. All aboard Florida, we like to have said from the start, it's really all about freight. Did you know Florida East Coast Railway is the exclusive provider to the Port of Miami and Port Everglades? Many of you probably realize Port of Miami is being dredged. The Panama Canal is going to be bringing in super Panamax ships. A huge amount. We're going to end up having triple the amount of freight, and the exclusive provider is, of course, Florida East Coast Railway. The CEO of FEC said that they hope they're going to grow their freight business from 10% today to as much as 30%. So make no mistake, there is more freight coming. Mr. Ledoux, he's Vice President for Florida East Coast Railway. They want to maximize their freight trains, and I know all of you have been stopped at a crossing at some point or another. They want to maximize, not all of their freight trains, but some of them, to 14,000 feet. 2.65-mile-long freight trains. In addition to our 32 high-speed all-aboard Florida trains. Just to show you the difference in the Panama Canal when these Panamax vessels start coming through. Today, ships coming into those ports carry around 4,500 containers. When the Super Panamax ships start coming in through the Port of Miami, 12,600 containers on each ship. Today, we're seeing about 14 freight trains travel through our area every day. In 2016, they expect the freight trains to increase to 20 per day and a 3% increase each year thereafter. So when you hear me say there's going to be over 50 trains a day, absolutely. 2016, 20 freight trains plus 32 of the all-aboard Florida trains. Talking about 3 trains per hour. What's interesting too, and everybody says, oh, Florida not all aboard, you must be hiring the media here. All these dangerous freight derailments have been happening lately. There's so many of them, there's so much that our federal government has actually just put a speed limit on ethanol and oil crude trains of 40 miles per hour if they're going through populated areas. There's a numerous amount of these derailments, and on average there's 2 derailments in the United States every day. That's what's so scary about, we don't know what's always hauled in these containers, and we do know there's ethanol going up and down these trains. They're up and down the tracks, and think about Stewart, Fort Pierce, Port St. Lucie, and Delray Beach, and Hope Sound. I mean, just all of our communities, these tracks bifurcate us, and to have a derailment like this is a thought that makes anybody shudder. The Federal Railroad Administration does maintain data on derailments, but they don't always identify what the substance was. As a result, it's impossible for them to identify crude and ethanol derailments. That's a quote from their website, or from political.com. So Florida Not All Aboard, what are we doing? From the start, again, creating community awareness and speaking with you is a huge part about it. We also follow the U.S. Coast Guard. We're hoping they're gonna weigh in more than they have. They really haven't weighed in tremendously with the bridges, but you can see this is our bridge here in Stewart. The one in Tequesta looks very much like it. And there are issues with these bridges already. Last Sunday, the bridge didn't lock down properly in Stewart. Eve Samples wrote about it because she was one of the people that was actually caught downtown because that train sat there for over an hour while they were trying to make the bridge work. So now, you think about it, we have 14 trains going over every day. These bridges aren't operating properly. The same thing happens in Waxahachie, and it cuts off the village of Tequesta. They want to add another 32 trains, so that bridge is going to have to go up and down another 32 times. It's unconscionable. When I sat in Representative Patrick Murphy's office with the FRA, he strongly urged them to please come inspect these bridges.
Yeah.
Don't just take our word for it, come and look at them. And they absolutely need to. Last summer I was able to meet with the Florida Department of Transportation. We took them out on a boat, showed them the bridge here in St. Lucie, and they were absolutely shocked at the condition of this bridge. And they said, I can understand your concern, but you know, Florida East Coast Railway owns these bridges. The other thing with these bridges is they don't release public the reports on the integrity of these bridges. They're a private company, they don't have to, that's what they've told us. And our contention is, look, if you're going to be transporting people of these bridges, it's absolutely a public safety issue now. Not only that, but our Indian River Lagoon, which, as Noreen said, I am very passionate about as well. If these bridges failure and we have something catastrophic happen into our lagoon, it's unconscionable that this company is just trying to ram through our communities like this without upgrading properly the system. The environmental impact study, I kind of went over that already. Of course, I have the scrub jay. There's a lot of species, threatened species that the train travels through, but it wasn't just the environment, it's our economics, it's our safety, it's the entire environment. From the very start, everybody said, why can't this just go out to the west? And we did ask, go west, big choo-choo, go west. The purple line that you see here is the CSX tracks. The red line is the proposed all-aboard Florida line and the current FEC line. As you can see, it makes sense. It still goes from Miami to Orlando. They have their depots in West Palm and Fort Lauderdale. They can still hit those depots. I asked all-aboard Florida. The response? They own these tracks. They don't own CSX. They're a private company. They will not entertain this option. So it's very frustrating because there are solutions, but it's going to cost them more money in the end because they'd have to pay CSX to lease those tracks. Again, I just want to stress this over and over. It's not a done deal. You know, Rusty Roberts, probably all of you have met him. I first met him back in March of last year. You know, and I start sharing with him the community concerns, and I said, Mr. Roberts, you know, this is terrible. What it's going to do to our communities, and on. And he goes, hey, see, you know, don't worry. Once the trains are up and running, people find they're really not as bad as they think. Get used to them. Get used to them. Allie Sewell's their public affairs manager. She informed me we need to learn to coexist. How nice is that? There's no stop. There's no benefit for Martin County whatsoever in many of the communities, but we need to learn to coexist. And of course, many people have heard this quote from Mr. Roberts again, and I've given this presentation with Rusty Roberts sitting in the audience, so he knows I quote him here. We own the land, we own the tracks, and we can do what they want. And that's truly the culture of this company, and that's why they've pretty much kind of thumbed their nose at our opinion and our plea for help, that this project is bad for our communities. And again, I go back, we just have to stop the funding. We have to keep our government from helping to fund this project. How can you help? Tell that to your elected officials. There's no vote, but be our voice. Keep a light on these private activity bonds and on the RIF loan process. We don't want to risk our tax dollars on this. I have a one button segment on my website where you can send a letter to over 25 officials, or there's also under government resources tab about every official that you can imagine here on the East Coast of Florida that's listed there. And it's power of the people. This was the first rally back in May of last year. Around 800 people showed up, and since then we're just continuing to grow. I think we had about 10,000 people, maybe 8,000 people on the petition at that time. Also, Congressman Posey and Congressman Murphy teamed up against All Aboard Florida. They went to the Government Accountability Office and asked them to review the potential risk of this project and the cost to the taxpayers. We're still waiting to hear from the Government Accountability Office on that, as a matter of fact. Last June, Senator Negron vowed to try to block any state money for All Aboard Florida. I was up in Tallahassee this past week. He still is adamantly opposed to using taxpayer funding for this project. Senator Altman, he asked Pam Bondi to look at the All Aboard Florida lease. I actually was in his office as well. They do not know, and they weren't able to tell me on Pam Bondi what her response is on this question, but they're
She
looking
hasn't
into
been
it.
told yet.
We also have Congressman Murphy and Frankel. They went and spoke with the U.S. Department of Transportation Secretary Fox. I met with Congressman Frankel, and she's in an interesting position because she's in the southern communities. She helped build City Place in West Palm Beach, and that's 2 of the roads that they're closing. She's very concerned, but she also has a lot of her constituents that are pro All Aboard Florida, so she just kind of stays in the middle, although I don't think she's personally real supportive of it. We have these 6 legislators, and I appreciate them so much. They blasted the All Aboard Florida plan to the Federal Railroad Administration. What I like about this is, you can see up here, this is not a partisan issue. We have Republicans and Democrats that know this is bad for our community, and they have all voiced their opposition. So Representative Harold Mayfield, Mager, and Representative Lee was supposed to be at that bond hearing, and the 3 ladies were able to make it, but of course, as I said, he got held up in the flight. Next battle, heading to the courts. Martin County and Indian River County have allocated over $4 million to fight the All Aboard Florida project. And as you are probably aware, Indian River County has already launched a lawsuit. Martin County soon will follow. They've approved that they're going to do that. So Commissioner Haddock spearheaded that here, and Commissioner Solari up in Indian River County, and all of our commissioners voted for it. So we're very thankful. We have I call it a sister group. I made some presentations to some HOAs in the southern part of the county early last year. And from there, they formed CARE Florida. It's comprised of a lot of the homeowner associations like Loblolly, Mariner, Sands, Frenchman's Creek, etc. And it's grown. They're up and down the coast now. They hired an attorney. His name is Steve Ryan out of Washington, D.C. He already has experience defeating trains. He had a project around the Mayo Clinic where they had high-speed freight trains that wanted to go through that area. He battled that, and in the end, they did end up defeating that project. What's interesting is they had about 7 years of court battles with the environmental impact statement. He said they lost every one of those challenges, but in the end, the funding was taken away and denied, and the project went away. With these lawsuits, it's a lot of money, but delay is good. It's going to cost Florida East Coast, it's going to cost Fortress even more money. Any delay is good. Any delay is a win for us. The more money we can cost these folks and keep them from using our taxpayer dollars, they'll end up going away in the end. We have to be relentless. The website for CARE Florida is saveourflorida.com. Lastly, I always have to shout out a tremendous amount of volunteers. Cindy's helped, and just so many people up and down the coast, from Delray all the way up to Brevard. Green markets, B&A Flea Market, we go to festivals, what have you, and ask people to sign the petition. So I have to really shout out to them. And you'll see signs around town. That's my volunteers. They put them out there, put them on their trucks. Just been wonderful. I always like to show this bicycle because it's this real, he's right here in Palm City, a real dear gentleman, and his community won't let him put in yard signs. So he said, I'll get the message out. So this is what he did. He rides his bike around the neighborhood.
That's what we do.
We have rallies. This was one up at Archie's last year. So, but please, if you have an organization that we can come and speak with and